The sky cracked open like a broken promise, spilling torrents of rain across the New Mexico Badlands. Elena Cartwright pulled her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders as she guided her mules toward the shelter of Red Canyon's towering walls. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the treacherous path ahead for brief, terrifying moments before plunging her back into near blindness. "Easy, Moses. Easy, Aaron," she murmured to her mules, their ears flattened against the driving rain. The animals snorted nervously, sensing something beyond the storm that made them skittish. Elena had learned to trust their instincts during her 2 years of traveling these dangerous routes alone. The wagon lurched violently as the right wheel caught in a washout, sending her supply boxes sliding. Glass bottles clinked ominously in the darkness behind her. She couldn't afford to lose her medicine inventory, not with the fever spreading through Santa Rosa and her promised delivery to Dr. Morrison in 3 days. Thunder rolled overhead like the hoofbeats of 1,000 horses, drowning out the world. Elena remembered that sound from 2 years ago when Apache raiders had descended on their ranch. The memory of John's blood pooling in the dust still haunted her dreams, along with his final words. "Elena, forgive." She'd never understood what he'd meant. Forgive whom? The savages who'd killed him? Herself for not being there to help? God for allowing such cruelty? The wagon shuddered to a halt beneath a rocky overhang, just as another lightning bolt illuminated the canyon. In that split second, Elena saw something that made her blood freeze. Muddy footprints leading to the back of her wagon, and the canvas cover hanging askew. Her hand found the Colt .45 tucked beneath her seat. John had taught her to shoot straight and shoot first in Apache country. "A hesitant trigger finger is a dead trigger finger," he'd always said. Elena climbed down from the driver's seat, boots splashing in the mud. Rain plastered her auburn hair to her skull as she crept toward the wagon's rear. The canvas flap moved slightly in the wind, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness within. She took a shaky breath and yanked the cover aside, pistol raised. A man lay sprawled among her supply boxes, unconscious and bleeding. But this wasn't just any man. The long black hair, bronze skin, and beaded leather clothing marked him unmistakably as Apache, a warrior, from the look of his muscled frame and the knife still clutched in his right hand. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. Here was one of them, one of the monsters who'd murdered John, who'd left her a widow at 26 with nothing but grief and rage to keep her company. Lightning flashed again, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Despite the war paint smeared by rain and blood, despite the fierce tattoos marking his arms, he looked surprisingly young, perhaps 30, with strong features that spoke of nobility rather than savagery. A bullet wound in his left shoulder had soaked his shirt with blood, and his breathing was shallow, labored. "You should kill him," she whispered to herself. "Take him to Fort Craig for the bounty. Let them hang him like they hanged the others." But as she stood there, rain streaming down her face, Elena found herself studying his hands. They were the hands of a craftsman, long-fingered, careful, with calluses from bow-making rather than brutality. And there around his neck hung something that made her gasp, a small silver cross, worn smooth with age. A Christian Apache. It seemed impossible, yet there it was. The warrior stirred, dark eyes fluttering open to meet hers. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the cultural chasm that had torn this territory apart. She saw no hatred in his gaze, only pain, and something that looked almost like recognition. "Please," he whispered in perfect English, his voice rough with fever. "I mean, no harm." Eleanor's pistol wavered. This wasn't what she'd expected. Apaches were supposed to be silent, stoic, violent. They weren't supposed to speak English or wear crosses or say please with genuine desperation. "You're bleeding all over my medical supplies," she found herself saying, though she kept the gun trained on him. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Forgive me, I was seeking shelter from more than the storm." More thunder crashed overhead, making both of them flinch. In the distance, Elena heard something that chilled her more than the rain. The sound of approaching horses, their hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls despite the storm. The warrior heard them too. His eyes widened with what looked like fear, not for himself, but for her. "You must go," he gasped, trying to sit up and failing. "They are not my people. Renegades. They will kill you." Elena felt the world spinning around her. An Apache warrior was warning her about other Apaches, protecting her. This was beyond her comprehension. The hoofbeats grew louder. "Please," the warrior whispered again, his eyes closing as fever overtook him. "Do not let them find you here." Elena stood frozen in the rain, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to run, to leave this savage to whatever fate awaited him. But something deeper, perhaps the same compassion that had driven her to become a traveling healer, made her look once more at his face. In sleep, he looked almost peaceful, vulnerable, human. The riders were getting closer. Elena made her choice. Elena threw the canvas cover back over the wagon and grabbed her rifle from beneath the driver's seat. The approaching hoofbeats echoed closer through the canyon, accompanied by harsh voices shouting in Apache. Her heart hammered as she pressed herself against the wagon's side, rain streaming down her face. Through the storm, she counted at least 4 riders picking their way along the canyon floor, their horses snorting and stumbling on the treacherous ground. Lightning illuminated their faces briefly, painted for war, with fresh scalps hanging from their belts. These weren't the reservation Apaches she'd seen in town, trading peacefully for supplies. These were the raiders from her nightmares. "Where is he?" one of them called in heavily accented English. "Takoda cannot have gone far with that bullet in him." Elena's breath caught. They were hunting the man in her wagon. The warrior, Takoda, had been telling the truth about running from his own people. "We should have killed the traitor when he first spoke against raiding the white settlements," another voice growled. "Now he makes us all look weak. Mangus will reward whoever brings back his head," the first rider replied. "The medicine man who turned against his own people deserves no mercy." Medicine man? Elena's mind reeled. The wounded warrior wasn't just any Apache. He was some kind of healer, someone important enough that they'd risk hunting him through a thunderstorm. The riders were close enough now that she could hear their horses splashing through puddles. One of them called out something in Apache, his voice carrying a cruel laugh. Elena didn't need to understand the words to recognize the tone. They were discussing what they'd do to any white woman they found. Behind her, she heard Takoda stirring weakly. If he made any noise, they were both dead. Lightning cracked overhead, and in its brief illumination, one of the raiders spotted her wagon. He pointed and shouted to the others, spurring his horse forward. Elena raised her rifle, knowing she could maybe take down 2 of them before they overwhelmed her. But as the first rider approached, his horse suddenly shied violently, rearing up and throwing him to the ground. The animal bolted in terror, leaving its rider cursing in the mud. "Something spooked the horses," another rider called nervously. "This canyon feels cursed tonight." Elena realized what had frightened the animals. The scent of blood from Takoda's wounds, mixed with the metallic smell of the storm, was making the horses panic. The warrior's injury was inadvertently protecting them both. "Search the wagon," the fallen rider commanded, struggling to his feet and drawing his knife. "If the traitor is here, we finish this." Elena's finger found her rifle's trigger. This was it, the moment she'd have to kill or be killed. But before she could fire, a weak voice called out from behind her. "I am here, Nalnish," Takoda said, pulling himself upright in the wagon despite his wound. "Leave the woman. Your quarrel is with me." The Apache called Nalnish laughed coldly. "The great medicine man, defender of white murderers. Look how far your mercy has brought you." "I defended innocent families," Takoda replied, his voice growing stronger despite his obvious pain. "Women and children who never harmed our people. That is not betrayal, that is honor." "Honor?" Nalnish spat. "You speak of honor while hiding behind a white woman's skirts?" Elena felt something shift inside her, a fierce protectiveness she hadn't experienced since John's death. Without thinking, she stepped into view, rifle aimed squarely at Nalnish's chest. "He's not hiding behind anything," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And this white woman doesn't wear skirts when she's hunting Apache raiders." The 4 warriors tensed, hands moving to their weapons. But Elena had the advantage of position and surprise. "You know what's interesting?" she continued, keeping her rifle trained on their leader. "I've been traveling these routes for 2 years, carrying medicine to settlements your people have attacked. I've seen what you do to families, to children. I have every reason to hate all of you." Nalnish's eyes narrowed. "Then why do you protect the traitor?" Elena glanced back at Takoda, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pain, yes, but also something that looked like admiration. "Because he's not like you," she said firmly. "He tried to stop you from murdering innocents. That makes him more of a man than any of you." Lightning illuminated the canyon again, and Elena saw Nalnish's hand move toward his tomahawk. But before he could draw it, another sound echoed through the storm, the distant bugle call of a cavalry patrol. The raiders froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. "Bluecoats," one of them hissed. "We must go." Nalnish's face twisted with frustration, but he knew they couldn't fight both Elena and approaching soldiers. "This is not finished, medicine man," he called to Takoda. "Mangus has put a price on your head. We will find you again." "I do not hide from Mangus or his cowards," Takoda replied, "but I will not let you harm innocents in my name." The raiders melted back into the storm as quickly as they'd appeared, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. Elena kept her rifle raised until she was certain they were gone, then slowly lowered it with shaking hands. The cavalry bugle sounded again, much closer now. Within minutes she could see torches approaching through the rain, a patrol of 10 soldiers led by a grizzled sergeant. "Ma'am!" the sergeant called, riding up to her wagon. "Sergeant Murphy, 3rd Cavalry. Are you hurt?" Elena quickly moved to block his view of the wagon's interior. "I'm fine, Sergeant. Just took shelter from the storm." "We're tracking a band of Apache raiders through this area," Murphy said, dismounting and approaching her. 4 of them, painted for war. "Do you see anything?" Elena felt Takoda's eyes on her back, waiting to see if she would betray him to the soldiers. Her mouth went dry as she realized she stood at a crossroads. She could turn him in, collect the bounty, and have her revenge against the Apache who'd taken so much from her, or she could protect the man who just risked his own life trying to warn her about the raiders. "They went that way," she said, pointing in the opposite direction the raiders had actually taken. "About 20 minutes ago, heading toward Devil's Canyon." Sergeant Murphy nodded grimly. "Much obliged, ma'am. You shouldn't be traveling alone in this weather. It's dangerous country." "I can take care of myself," Elena replied, which was clearly true given what the sergeant could see of her armed stance. After the patrol rode off into the storm, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. She turned back to find Takoda watching her with dark eyes full of questions. "Why?" he asked simply. Elena wasn't sure she knew the answer herself. "Maybe because you tried to protect me. Maybe because I'm tired of all the killing." She paused, studying his face in the intermittent lightning. "Or maybe because something about you reminds me that there's still some good left in this godforsaken territory." Takoda nodded slowly, as if he understood her confusion. "You saved my life twice tonight. I owe you a debt I cannot repay." "You can start by not bleeding to death in my medical supplies," Elena said, surprised by the touch of humor in her own voice. For the first time, Takoda smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "I will try, Elena Cartwright," Elena started. "How do you know my name?" "I have heard the Apache speak of the medicine woman who travels alone, bringing healing to all settlements regardless of which people live there. They call you she who heals without fear." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not fearless, I'm just stubborn." "There is wisdom in stubbornness," Takoda said, settling back against the supply boxes with obvious exhaustion. "It has kept us both alive tonight." As the storm began to ease, Elena found herself faced with a new dilemma. She'd protected him from the raiders and the cavalry, but what happened now? She couldn't just leave him here to bleed, and she couldn't take him to any settlement without both of them facing certain death. She looked at this Apache warrior, this enemy who'd become something else entirely in the space of one stormy night, and realized her carefully ordered world had just become infinitely more complicated. Dawn broke gray and cold over the canyon, painting the red stone walls in muted shades of amber. Elena had spent the night huddled in the driver's seat, listening to Takoda's labored breathing and wrestling with thoughts that wouldn't give her peace. By morning, his fever had worsened, and she knew he'd die without proper treatment. "I must be out of my mind," she muttered, climbing into the wagon bed where Takoda lay semi-conscious among her scattered supplies. His shirt was soaked with sweat and blood, and when she pressed her hand to his forehead, his skin burned like a furnace. The bullet wound in his shoulder showed signs of infection, red, angry flesh surrounding the entry point where the slug was still lodged. Elena had treated dozens of gunshot wounds in her travels, but never on an Apache warrior, never on someone whose people had killed her husband. The irony wasn't lost on her as she gathered her medical instruments. "Takoda," she said softly, shaking his good shoulder. "I need to get that bullet out, but it's going to hurt." His dark eyes opened, unfocused but aware. "Do what you must," he whispered. "I trust you." Those simple words hit Elena harder than she expected. When had anyone last trusted her completely? When had she trusted anyone? "I'll need to cut away your shirt," she said, reaching for her surgical scissors. Takoda nodded weakly and tried to sit up to help her, but the movement sent fresh blood seeping through the fabric. Elena gently pushed him back down. "Stay still, you stubborn fool. You've already lost too much blood." As she carefully cut away the leather shirt, Elena found herself studying the man beneath. His chest and arms were marked with scars, some from battle, others clearly ritual. But what caught her attention were the gentler marks, calluses from crafting rather than killing, and hands that moved with a healer's precision even in his fevered state. "You really are a medicine man," she said, more to herself than to him. "My grandmother taught me the healing ways," Takoda murmured, his voice drifting. She said, "The spirits gave me hands for mending, not breaking." Elena cleaned the wound area with whiskey, causing Takoda to tense but not cry out. "Your grandmother sounds wise." She was. She also said, "Someday I would meet a woman whose spirit burned as bright as mine, a woman who would teach me about healing hearts, not just bodies." Elena's hand stilled for a moment. Was he delirious, or was he speaking directly to her? "You're feverish. You don't know what you're saying." "Perhaps," Takoda said, his eyes finding hers with startling clarity. "But fever often reveals truths we hide from ourselves." Elena felt her cheeks warm and focused intently on preparing her instruments. She'd removed bullets before, but her hands had never trembled like this. "This is going to be the worst part," she warned, holding up her surgical knife. Takoda reached up with his good arm and caught her wrist gently. "Elena, what happened to your husband?" The question caught her off guard, bringing the familiar surge of grief and rage. "Apache raiders killed him 2 years ago. Shot him down in our own yard while I was in town buying supplies." "I am sorry," Takoda said simply. "What was his name?" John Cartwright." She looked away, not wanting him to see the tears that always came when she spoke John's name. "Tell me about him." Elena stared at this wounded Apache warrior, asking about her dead husband, wondering if the whole world had gone mad. "Why do you want to know?" "Because he was important to you. Because understanding your pain helps me understand why you chose to save me despite it." For reasons she couldn't explain, Elena found herself talking. "John was kind, patient. He taught school before we moved out here to start the ranch. He believed education could bridge the gap between cultures, that understanding would end the violence. He sounds like a good man." He was. Too good for this brutal place. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The day he died, his last word was forgive. I never understood what he meant." Takoda was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps he meant forgive yourself, for not being there, for surviving when he did not. Elena's breath caught. In 2 years, no one had suggested that interpretation. "How could you possibly know?" "Because I carry the same guilt," Takoda said softly. "I was away hunting when raiders attacked my grandmother's camp. White soldiers looking for revenge after a stagecoach robbery. They killed her and 12 others, including children. I have spent 2 years trying to understand what she would have wanted me to do with my anger." Elena stared at him, seeing her own pain reflected in his dark eyes. "And what did you decide? That hatred is a poison that kills the bearer first, that if I wanted to honor her memory, I had to choose healing over revenge." He met her gaze directly. "Even if it meant my own people would call me traitor." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, a wall she'd built around her heart to keep the grief from consuming her. "The raiders who killed John, they weren't your people?" "No. Mangus leads a band of renegades, outcasts from many tribes who have chosen the path of endless war. They care nothing for honor or the old ways. They kill for the pleasure of killing. But you're Apache. You all look the same to us." Takoda's expression grew sad. "And all white people look the same to many of my people. This is how wars continue, when we see only the enemy, never the individual." Elena realized she was crying openly now, 2 years of suppressed grief, finally finding release. "I've hated all of you for so long it was easier than missing him." "Hatred is easier than grief," Takoda agreed, "but it is also emptier." She wiped her eyes and picked up the surgical knife again. "I need to get this bullet out before the infection kills you." "Elena," his voice was gentle but serious, "if I die, what will you do?" "You're not going to die. I won't let you." "But if I do, then I'll mourn you," she said fiercely. "Just like I mourned John. Because you're not just an Apache anymore, you're Takoda, the medicine man who risked his life protecting people he didn't even know. The man who helped me remember that not all pain has to end in hatred." Takoda smiled, and Elena felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with grief. "Then I will try very hard to live, Elena Cartwright." Elena began the delicate work of extracting the bullet, her hands steady now with purpose. As she worked, Takoda spoke softly of his grandmother's teachings about plants and healing, his voice a soothing counterpoint to the difficult surgery. She used to say that every wound tells a story, he said, as Elena successfully removed the bullet. Some stories are about violence and hatred, but others are about courage and redemption. Elena cleaned and bandaged the wound with practiced efficiency, but her mind was racing. What story does this wound tell? That sometimes the enemy becomes the savior. That healing can happen between the most unlikely people. Dakota's eyes were growing heavy as the pain medication took effect, but he fought to stay conscious. Elena, there is something you must know about the raid that killed your husband. What do you mean? Mangus. He was bragging last night about a raid 2 years ago where they took something valuable, something that belonged to a school teacher. Elena's blood turned to ice. What did they take? A book, your husband's journal, where he wrote his ideas about peace between our peoples. Mangus uses it to mock white efforts at understanding. But more than that, Dakota's voice grew urgent despite his exhaustion. Your husband saw them coming. He could have run, could have hidden, but he chose to stay and warn the Apache family camped near your stream, a grandmother and her grandson who were gathering medicinal plants. Elena stared at him in shock. What are you saying? Your husband died saving Apache lives, Elena. That was what he was trying to forgive. Not his death, but your hatred of the very people he died protecting. The world seemed to tilt around Elena as understanding crashed over her like a wave. John's final word wasn't about forgiving himself or her. It was about forgiving the Apache people as a whole, knowing she would blame them all for the actions of a few renegades. The family he saved, she whispered. What happened to them? The grandmother survived to tell the story. She was... Dakota's eyes closed as fever took him again. She was my grandmother, Elena. Your husband saved my life. Elena sat in stunned silence as Dakota drifted into unconsciousness, his words echoing in her mind. The man she'd been nursing back to health was alive because of John's sacrifice. The enemy she'd been learning to care for was connected to her husband's final act of courage. Outside the wagon, she could hear the sounds of the desert coming alive, birds calling, wind rustling through sagebrush, the distant howl of a coyote, normal sounds of a world that suddenly felt entirely different. Elena looked down at Dakota's peaceful face and felt the last walls around her heart crumble completely. This wasn't just about healing his wounds anymore. Somehow, without either of them planning it, they were healing each other's souls. 3 days had passed since Elena removed the bullet from Dakota's shoulder. They'd moved deeper into the canyon system, following hidden trails that Dakota knew from his youth, staying ahead of both Mangus's raiders and the cavalry patrols hunting them. Elena had never imagined she could feel safe traveling with an Apache, but Dakota's knowledge of the land and his quiet strength had become her anchor in this dangerous game of survival. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they made camp in a secluded alcove, hidden behind a curtain of juniper trees and red stone. Elena tended to her mules while Dakota, his arm still in a sling but moving more freely, gathered wood for a small, smokeless fire. "Are you pushing yourself too hard?" Elena called to him, noting the careful way he moved his injured shoulder. "That wound needs more time to heal." Dakota straightened, a bundle of dry wood in his good arm, and gave her a look that made her pulse quicken. Over the past 3 days, she'd caught herself staring at him more often than was proper, admiring the graceful way he moved despite his injury, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the gentle strength of his hands when he helped her with camp tasks. "You worry about me like a wife worries about her husband," he said, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I worry about you like a doctor worries about a stubborn patient who won't follow orders." "Ah," Dakota smiled, settling the wood near their fire ring. "And do all your patients make you blush when they speak of wives and husbands?" "You're impossible," Elena muttered, but she couldn't hide her own smile. When had this easy banter developed between them? When had the fear and hatred transformed into something that felt dangerously like affection? That evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and hardtack, Elena found herself watching Dakota's face in the firelight, the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd noticed while tending his wounds. "Tell me about your life before," she said suddenly. "Before you became a medicine man, before all this violence." Dakota considered her question, stirring the fire with a stick. "I was married once, to a woman named Ayana. It means eternal blossom in our language." Elena felt an unexpected stab of jealousy. What happened to her? "She died in childbirth 3 winters ago. Our son lived only 2 days. The pain in his voice was unmistakable. After that, I threw myself into my medicine training. My grandmother said grief could either destroy a man or teach him to heal others' pain. I'm sorry, Elena said softly. I didn't know. How could you? We carry our losses inside us, invisible to others. Dakota looked at her across the fire. What about you? Did you and John want children? Elena stared into the flames. We tried for 3 years. I lost 2 babies before they were born. John said it was God's will, that maybe we were meant to serve others instead of raising our own family. She laughed bitterly. After he died, I wondered if God just didn't want me to be happy. Or perhaps, Dakota said gently, your path was always meant to lead somewhere else, to become the healer who travels between worlds, bringing comfort to all people, including Apache medicine men who bleed all over my supplies, especially Apache medicine men who bleed all over your supplies. They shared a laugh, and Elena realized how natural this felt, sitting by a fire with this man, sharing their deepest sorrows, and finding comfort in each other's understanding. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like a betrayal of John's memory. Instead, it felt like coming alive again after 2 years of merely surviving. Elena, Dakota said, his voice growing serious, what happens when we reach Santa Rosa? You cannot be seen traveling with me. My presence will put you in danger. Elena had been dreading this conversation. I've been thinking about that. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles outside town, been abandoned for years. You could wait there while I deliver my supplies and gather information. Information about what? About where you can go to be safe. There must be somewhere, maybe the reservation or... I cannot return to the reservation, Dakota interrupted. Mangus has allies there, and I will not hide among people who see my efforts at peace as weakness. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. Then where will you go? Perhaps it is time for me to leave this territory entirely. Go north, to lands where the wars between our peoples have not yet reached. No, the word came out more forcefully than Elena intended. You can't leave. Dakota studied her face in the firelight. Why not? Because I'm falling in love with you, Elena thought desperately. Because for the first time since John died, I feel alive again. Because the thought of never seeing you again makes me want to scream. Because you're needed here, she said instead. There are people on both sides who want peace, who believe in what you're trying to do. And what about you, Elena? What do you want? The question hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Elena looked into Dakota's eyes and saw her own longing reflected there, the same desperate hope that maybe, despite everything that stood between them, they had found something worth fighting for. I want, she began, then stopped. How could she put into words feelings that defied everything she'd believed about herself, about her world, about what was possible between their peoples? Dakota rose from his place by the fire and moved to sit beside her. Say it, Elena. Whatever it is, say it. I want you to stay, she whispered. Not somewhere else, not in hiding, with me. Dakota reached up with his good hand and touched her face gently. And I want to stay with you. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. Are they? We've already survived 3 days together. We've protected each other, healed each other. Maybe what? Maybe we can build a life together while both our peoples try to kill us. Dakota's voice was tender but realistic. Elena, I have seen what happens to couples who cross these lines. The hatred destroys them. Not always, Elena said stubbornly. There are mixed marriages, people who live as outcasts, accepted by neither side, constantly watching over their shoulders. Dakota's thumb traced her cheekbone. Is that what you want for us? Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I don't know what I want anymore. A week ago, I thought I wanted revenge on all Apaches. Now I can't imagine my life without one particular Apache in it. Elena, Dakota said softly, and she opened her eyes to find him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. You have already given me more than I ever expected. My life, my hope, my faith in the possibility of understanding between our peoples. Do not ask me to risk your safety for my happiness. What if it's not just your happiness? Elena asked. What if it's mine too? Before Dakota could answer, they heard something that made them both freeze, horses approaching and voices calling out in Apache. But these weren't the harsh tones of Mangus's raiders. These voices carried authority and dignity. My uncle, Dakota breathed, recognizing one of the speakers. Chief Cochise's war leader. They are looking for me. Elena felt her heart sink. Are they here to take you back? I do not know. But Elena, if they find you with me... I know. Elena stood quickly. checking her weapons. Should we run? Takoda shook his head. There is nowhere to run from my uncle's tracking skills. And I am tired of running. He stood as well, wincing slightly as his injured shoulder protested. Whatever happens, Elena, know that these past days with you have been the happiest of my life. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. Takoda, promise me, he said urgently, taking her hands in his. Promise me that whatever my uncle says, whatever happens, you will not forget that love can exist even in the midst of war. I promise, Elena whispered. But only if you promise me something in return. Anything. Promise me this isn't goodbye. Promise me we'll find a way. Takoda pulled her close with his good arm, and Elena felt the solid warmth of his body against hers. For a moment, the whole world reduced to this. The beating of his heart, the scent of sage smoke in his hair, the impossible rightness of being held by this man who should have been her enemy. I promise, he whispered against her hair. Whatever it takes, we will find a way. The voices were getting closer now, and Elena could see torchlight flickering through the trees. She and Takoda stepped apart reluctantly, but their eyes remained locked, each memorizing the other's face, as if it might be the last time they saw it. Elena straightened her spine and checked that her pistol was loaded. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, and maybe, just maybe, they would survive it together too. 5 Apache riders emerged from the shadows, their horses stepping carefully through the rocky terrain. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her pistol, but Takoda gently touched her wrist, shaking his head. These weren't raiders. They carried themselves with the dignity of seasoned warriors, and their leader, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked braids and weathered features, dismounted with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. Uncle, Takoda said in English, stepping forward with obvious respect, you have traveled far to find me. The older Apache studied his nephew, taking in the bandaged shoulder and the white woman standing protectively nearby. I have traveled far to bring you home, Takoda. Chief Cochise is dying. He asks for his medicine man. Elena felt her heart clench. Cochise. Even she knew that name. The legendary Apache leader who had tried to maintain peace with the white settlers before the betrayals drove him to war. How long does he have? Takoda asked, pain clear in his voice. Days. Perhaps a week. The lung sickness has him. The older man's eyes shifted to Elena. But first, nephew, explain to me why you travel with one of the people who have brought such suffering to our lands. Elena stepped forward before Takoda could answer. Because your nephew saved my life, sir, and because I've learned that not all conflicts have to end in bloodshed. The Apache leader, Elena assumed this must be Takoda's uncle, regarded her with keen intelligence. You speak boldly for someone so outnumbered, white woman. She speaks truthfully, Uncle Nietzsche. Takoda interjected. This is Elena Cartwright, the healer known among our people as she who heals without fear. She removed a bullet from my shoulder and protected me from both Mangus's raiders and the blue-coat soldiers. Nietzsche's eyebrows rose slightly. The medicine woman? The one who treated our children during the fever sickness last winter? Elena nodded. I remember. 3 children from your band. They all recovered. And you asked for no payment, no favor. You simply healed them because they were sick. Nietzsche studied her face in the firelight. Why? Because suffering is suffering, regardless of who bears it, Elena replied simply. And because a very wise man once taught me that hatred is a poison that destroys the vessel containing it. Nietzsche glanced at Takoda, who nodded confirmation. She speaks of her husband, Uncle. He died defending Apache lives, including grandmothers. The older warrior's expression shifted, understanding dawning. You are the widow of the schoolteacher, the one whose sacrifice my mother spoke of before the spirits claimed her. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of Takoda's grandmother. Your mother was a remarkable woman. Her grandson has her courage and her compassion and her stubbornness, Nietzsche said with what might have been the ghost of a smile. He turned back to Takoda. The chief is not the only one asking for you, nephew. Agent Jeffords has come from the reservation. He says the government men in Washington want to discuss a new treaty. They need someone who can speak for both worlds. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Agent Jeffords was known as one of the few white officials the Apache trusted, a man who had lived among them and understood their ways. What kind of treaty? Takoda asked. One that would create a special territory where our people could live according to the old ways, but with protection under white law. Where mixed marriages would be recognized. Where children of 2 worlds could grow up without choosing sides. Nietzsche's eyes moved meaningfully between Takoda and Elena. It seems your grandmother's vision of harmony between peoples may not have been mere dreams after all. Elena stared at the Apache leader, hardly daring to hope. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I am saying that sometimes the spirits work in ways we do not expect, Nietzsche replied. My nephew has spent 2 years trying to build bridges between our peoples, and you have spent 2 years healing wounds without asking which side caused them. Perhaps it is time for that work to become more than individual acts of courage. Takoda reached for Elena's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Uncle, I must tell you, my feelings for Elena go beyond respect for her healing skills. I have eyes, nephew, and I am not blind to the way she looks at you either. Nietzsche's expression grew serious. But love alone will not protect you from those who profit from hatred. If you choose this path, you choose danger. We've already chosen danger, Elena said firmly. We've spent 3 days running from people who want us dead for the simple crime of seeing each other as human beings, but we've also discovered something worth fighting for. And what is that? Nietzsche asked. Elena looked at Takoda, seeing in his eyes the same certainty that filled her own heart. Hope, the possibility that understanding can triumph over fear, that 2 people from different worlds can build something better together than either could create alone. Nietzsche was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them. Then he spoke to the other warriors in Apache. Elena caught a few words. Grandmother, vision, healing. But the conversation was too rapid for her limited understanding. Finally, Nietzsche nodded and turned back to them. Chief Cochise has asked me to tell you this. If you choose to walk together, you will have his blessing and the protection of our band. But you must also serve as examples of what peace between our peoples can look like. Are you prepared for such responsibility? Elena felt overwhelmed. A week ago, she'd been a lonely widow traveling dangerous trails with nothing but grief for company. Now she was being offered not just love, but a purpose that could help heal the wounded land she'd come to call home. I am, she said without hesitation. And I am as well, Takoda added, squeezing her hand. But Elena, are you certain? This path will not be easy. There will be people on both sides who see our union as betrayal. Elena thought of John, of his final word, forgive. She thought of his journal, filled with dreams of peace between cultures. She thought of the past 3 days with Takoda, the way her frozen heart had come back to life in the warmth of his presence. John always believed that understanding was possible, she said softly. He died protecting that belief. If our being together can help make his dream a reality, then I can't think of a better way to honor his memory. Takoda lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently. Then we go forward together, whatever may come. Nietzsche nodded approvingly. Good. We ride at dawn to meet with Chief Cochise and Agent Jeffords. There is much work to be done and time is short. He paused, his stern expression softening slightly. But tonight, nephew, you and your woman should rest. Tomorrow begins a new chapter in the story of our peoples. As the Apache warriors made their own camp nearby, Elena and Takoda sat together by their fire, hands still clasped, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. Are you frightened? Takoda asked quietly. Terrified, Elena admitted, but also more hopeful than I've been in years. We're going to face obstacles I can't even imagine yet. But we will face them together, Takoda said, turning to look at her. Elena, I want you to know, whatever happens with treaties and territories, I love you, not just for saving my life, but for showing me that the heart can heal even the deepest wounds. Elena felt tears spill over as she reached up to touch his face. I love you too, Takoda. You've given me back my faith in the future, in the possibility that pain can transform into something beautiful. He leaned down to kiss her then, and Elena felt the last pieces of her broken heart fuse together in the warmth of his embrace. This wasn't just about 2 people finding love. It was about 2 worlds finding a path toward understanding. When they broke apart, both were smiling through their tears. So, Elena said, wiping her eyes, I suppose this means I'll need to learn more Apache, and you'll probably have to teach me not to shoot first and ask questions later when I meet your relatives. Takoda laughed, the sound rich and warm in the desert night. And I will need to learn how to drink your terrible coffee without making faces. My coffee is not terrible. Elena, my beloved, your coffee could wake the dead and send them running back to their graves. Elena swatted his good arm playfully, then settled against his side, careful of his injured shoulder. I suppose we'll have plenty of time to work on our differences. A lifetime, Takoda agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And I plan to enjoy every moment of it. Above them, the desert stars shone down on two hearts that had found their way to each other across the vast divide of culture and history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight, there was only this: the quiet miracle of love blooming in the unlikeliest of places, tended by the gentlest of hands. Elena closed her eyes and listened to the steady beat of Dakota's heart beneath her cheek. For the first time since John's death, she wasn't just surviving each day. She was living it fully and completely, with a man who had taught her that even the deepest wounds could heal when touched by understanding and love. The Wild West would always be a harsh and dangerous place, but Elena and Dakota had found something more powerful than violence. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found hope for a future where love could bridge any divide.